Between saving Jean's life and being swallowed whole in the asshole's place, Aaron had forgotten about Mikasa and Armin waiting for him. His leg burned where it had been mashed into a stump. His left hand wiggled, despite knowing it lay outside on the ground, maybe even on the ground beside Jean. Jean. Why had he decided to save him? He was an asshole, quick to anger, naive. Aaron knew why he saved Jean. Were Aaron to be raised in a safe home instead of on the streets with the doomed, he would have been just like Jean. Fuck me, he growled, and smacked his handless limb into the disgusting pit of Titan slime. Jean and Aaron were too similar, too different, too young. They were destined to be enemies. Now Jean was indebted to Aaron. Now Aaron was destined to death. He'd bleed out inside this beast, no one's fault but his own. And Jean, if he lived past this day, would bear the guilt. Aaron looked up at the hole he'd fallen through, the throat so high above him. His tanks were damaged, not that he'd be able to use them, missing half his limbs as he was. Fuck. Red. The inside of the Titan was purely red. Armin always told him to stay calm, to take deep breaths. Blink away the red, he'd say. No blinking this away, Armin, he grunted. The only way to live was to fight, and if he died, he was dead anyway. Aaron's right hand groped down his uniform to find his blades. He still had both sheaths, though one was bent from his harsh landing right before saving Jean's life. Could he cut his way out from the inside? In training, they never mentioned such a thing happening. Usually, people were bit in half, not swallowed whole. In training, they were taught how to avoid being eaten. How could they possibly know if you could cut your way out? He pulled the blade free and gave the pulsing flesh an assessing look. What more could the Titan possibly do to him now? Dead either way. Blade in hand, he crawled through the vile liquid until he was close enough to a wall of stomach tissue. His missing foot ached, phantom toes wiggling on phantom feet. Even his left hand, which he knew was gone, seemed to reform from the mess. Insane. Aaron opened his mouth and laughed. Goo dripped down his lips and landed on his tongue. His stomach churned, and he gagged. He propped himself against the wall, pulled the blade back, and stuck it into the wall with every last bit of strength. The wall shivered, and the gentle rocking he'd grown used to jolted into action. Great waves of blood-soaked slime sloshed from one end to the other and pulled Aaron away from his last fight. No! He howled, only to have his mouth and eyes and nose filled with the goo. Choking and splashing to keep his head above the surface, Aaron saw darkness encroaching on his vision. Were his eyes open? No. He refused to die. No! 2 hands clawed at the water, 2 feet kicked to the ground. Live. Sharp, stinging, his hands grew larger. Claws sprouted from his nails and tore into the side walls of the stomach. His mouth gaped open, jaw breaking, unhinging, and skin sloughing off. Fight! His spine bent, broke, and lengthened. His brain burst, too big for the skull. The pressure exploded his head, and juice dribbled into the Titan goo, mixing with the mess. A heaving, twisting pile of flesh and splintered bone writhed. It grew in size, absorbing the red goo lining the Titan's stomach. Aaron's consciousness, lost with the destruction of his brain, slowly returned. He heaved a breath and stumbled to the ground, hands planted to stabilize. He blinked to clear the fog in his eyes. For a moment, his vision filled with red, then back to the broken, cobbled street below. What? He opened his mouth to curse, only to blow a cloud of steam instead. Aaron looked at the hands holding him up. They looked like his hands, but they were clean, unscarred, whole, and and they were the size of the hay cart on its side just to the right. He flexed his fingers and felt his mouth widen at the wiggle of the massive fingers. They were his. Cool air blew on his tongue, and he frowned, or tried to. Aaron knew he had lips, could feel them in his memory, and yet they weren't there. He used his tongue to feel for what he knew wasn't possible to lose. Instead, his tongue met teeth and gums, and then his own nose. His tongue wasn't that long. Just as he shifted to settle into a seat, a pinprick on his shoulder had him swat instinctively. He moved away from the annoyance and looked over to see a person using ODM to dive for the building. Except, Aaron's brain paused when he saw how tiny they were. Or really, he observed, looking back at the hay cart, Aaron was enormous, titanic. Aaron was a titan? Inside, he felt himself wheeze with disbelief. Impossible. The person screamed, and Aaron looked back to watch them, directing a group of trainees away. They fled towards the inner walls, away from Aaron, away from the breached gates. How? No. He halted his thoughts right there, refusing to think on what the actual fuck just happened, and why the hell he was a fucking titan. His thoughts were too sluggish to try to figure this out. Aaron rose to his feet, swaying at the odd change of balance. Everything was out of proportion. He felt wrong. He stumbled away from the fleeing cadets and crashed into a building. How was he supposed to find Armin and Mikasa when he was like this? Fuck. Aaron's thoughts ground to a halt. Where were his family? He whipped his head to the left, then stumbled with vertigo when the feeling kicked in. Any thoughts he managed to hold onto until that point scattered. Everything was too much. It was catching up to him, and Aaron couldn't keep his hold on the world. His body slumped and fell like a tree. Unconscious before he hit the ground, he never noticed the arrival of mounted figures. When Aaron came back to consciousness, the sky was clouded with smoke. He rolled to his back and blearily stared at the billowing clouds. The caustic thread of flame. What was going on? Forgetting his change, he hauled himself upright and looked towards the inner walls. The inner portion of Trost was burning. From it, he could see Titans pacing. "They're trying to keep the Titans away from the gate." A voice spoke up, and Aaron jumped in fright. He turned to see Mikasa, giving him a hard look from building roof. Beside her, Armin slowly smiled. "Aaron?" he asked, cautious. Aaron nodded, then looked down at himself. Upon waking, he'd forgotten what happened. But how did Armin recognize him? He looked back to his family to see Armin's lip trembling. "You never pay any attention to people when you wake up," he explained, as if reading Aaron's mind. Armin was smart like that. "Mikasa scared you, and you understand us." Aaron breathed out a cloud of steam. He hadn't thought about what he would do if he found them like this. Luckily, Armin was smart and observant. Mikasa folded her arms and frowned. "How did you—" she began to ask, her tone implying a lecture incoming. Mikasa," Armin interrupted her, raising his hands with an awkward look. Maybe wait until we're out." Oh, right. Aaron looked back at the burning buildings, then away towards the gate. Straggler Titans entered still, picking through the destruction. Could he fight them away? Careful of his friends, Aaron straightened his posture and pushed away from the building he was propped against. He swayed. A high-pitched whine came out of his throat. Dismayed, Aaron tried to stand on his own again. How did regular Titans walk? They were all lopsided. Shouldn't he be able to just hunch one way and stay upright? "Wait!" Armin waved his hands at Aaron. When he was sure he had the other's attention, Armin propped a hand under his chin and gave Aaron an assessing look. You're built differently to other Titans. It's like... He waved one hand in a vague ripple motion. Like how you were before your training camp. You were gangly and starved, like us. But then you put muscle on, and now you're a strong Titan. Aaron nodded slowly, wondering where his friend was going. You didn't realize it because you were gaining the muscle slowly, but you changed the way you stood. Your center of balance shifted, and I think that's what has happened here. You'll need to adjust for the change. Well, what Armin said made sense. Aaron laid out another breath, then mentally apologized when both of his friends jumped to the side to avoid the huge cloud of steam. He would need to work on that too. Aaron thought back to when he woke up. He'd managed to rise to his feet with a burst of adrenaline, for a moment forgetting he was 15 meters too tall. He'd hunched forward in a squat. He kept tipping over when he tried to stand up straight. Carefully, Aaron took one hand away from where he was holding onto the building and shifted his weight to settle into the balls of his feet. His other hand slowly released the crutch as well, until he was standing, hunched, with his weight forward. The change of gravity was incredibly odd. Aaron remembered being trained to rest on the balls of his feet for quick movement. But when the Corps was trained in ODM, they were told to anchor themselves with their heels, to lean back and away from the force, using their knees to cushion them. Leaning forward, head tilted down and hands out front, Aaron should be overbalancing and falling on his face. If he were his normal size, at the very least. This was annoying. You figured it out, Armin cheered. Aaron looked up, careful to pay attention to the new standing position. He grunted. We should get going, Mikasa directed, looking away. The city is only going to get more overrun. With them here, they might ignore us running out. Right, Armin agreed and used his ODM to jump down to the street. We'll get the horses. Aaron, you'll need to lead us. You've got the best view. Mikasa stayed on the roof at Aaron's eye level. Aaron, she started, hands reaching out. Never mind. She turned away and wiped her face. We'll talk later. Damn it. Aaron watched her join Armin on the ground. They jogged over to another building and went inside, quickly returning with the horses behind them. Would Aaron even be able to talk later? He was a Titan. Ready, Armin called up from the ground. He'd think on it later. Aaron looked toward Rosa's gate and began to walk down the street, looking for the shortest route to take. He caught himself overbalancing a few times, with a stumble and a slam into a roof, panting unevenly. Learning to walk again fucking sucked. He decided after the 5th time, crashing into a building. He wasn't getting hurt by all the stumbling, per se. His flesh would steam, he'd feel the beginnings of a bruise, then it would fade away into phantom pain. Aaron had little time to contemplate the unfairness of his situation. As a 7-meter wandered into his path, he was hit with the realization that he didn't have his blades on him, his friends were behind him, and he could barely walk in a straight line. How the hell was he meant to fight this thing? The Titan in question fixated on him and lunged, arms flapping behind it. Aaron flinched, raising a hand to protect. The beast latched onto his hand and began to gnaw. Dumbfounded, he gaped at it, chewing away. It was eating him? But he was a Titan. What's the point of being a Titan if I'm still food? He swung his other hand around and socked the Titan in the side of the head. It released its bite and went flying into the side of the street, blood streaming and spraying all around. Aaron followed his punch, picked it up and threw it down again. The nape. Could he step on its nape? Did brute force work? Why the hell not? The Titan's jaw grew back together, though it turned out to be for nothing. Aaron chased after where he'd thrown it and kicked its neck. The head ricocheted away like a ball, while its body remained limp on the ground. The steam wafted up, signifying its death, and Aaron, filled with adrenaline, let out a shout of victory. In his current body, the proclamation sounded more like a roar. Aaron, that was so cool! He turned away from his victim to see Armin waving up at him. You're balancing perfectly now. Was he? Aaron surveyed his stature and looked at the carcass disintegrating below his feet. So he was. While fighting, he naturally switched into staying on the balls of his feet, and that translated well in this form. We need to keep moving, Mikasa urged the duo. Aaron, I'm happy you're figuring your Titan out, but we need to escape the city before anything else happens. Armin schooled his expression quickly. Yes, I'm sorry, Mikasa, you're right. He pulled himself back into the saddle and looked back up at Aaron. Whenever you're ready. Aaron grunted. Be natural. He needed to not focus so much on how he was walking and instead focus on his mindset. Taking the lead, Aaron wove through the streets. Occasionally, a rogue Titan would catch sight of him and move to attack. With his newfound size and fighting memory, Aaron was able to incapacitate most of them. Others he held back while Mikasa and Armin ran ahead. But now they were almost out. The wall was only a few blocks over, with the ruined gate their goal. An entire block lay crushed below a boulder larger than his current body. Aaron halted and stared at the ruins scattered from the boulder's landing. No, Aaron, run. I need to know you make it out of here. Tears streamed down his mother's face. She clutched him tightly, even as she urged him to leave. Even if you lift this beam, my legs are crushed. Baby, my boy. Her voice cracked. No, Mama, I can't leave you. Don't make me. He couldn't see. It was all blurry. Don't make me leave you. My life is worth you living, Aaron. Aaron? He turned away from the boulder, seeing Armin and Mikasa waiting ahead. We need to go. Are you okay? How could he tell them? He looked at the hole, then back to the boulder. He couldn't lift the boulder back then to save his mother's life, but now? Aaron raised his hands and looked at them, gnarled, veined. Would Mama be proud of him this day? She wished that he would live, that her death would have a meaning. Would his Mama be angry with his callousness for a city that abandoned him? Mama, he whined. Aaron? Armin looked at the boulder and back, realization widening his eyes. No! Armin jumped from his horse, leaving Mikasa to catch the reins. No, Aaron, they're not worth it. You don't know if you can lift that boulder, or even how long you'll be a Titan for. Armin jogged to Aaron's feet and looked up. Come here, Aaron. Obligingly, Aaron dropped down to a crouch and placed his eye beside Armin's face. What if you change back while you're under the boulder? You'll die. Aaron, you'll die, and then we'll be alone. At this moment, Aaron wished his eyesight was better, that he could see more than a blurred face. Armin sounded sad. Was he crying? How could Aaron help his brother? What have they ever done for you? Why would you consider helping this city when all they've ever done is spit on us? If they saw you and they had their weapons, they would kill you right now. Armin placed a hand below Aaron's eye. Aaron, you're nothing. We're nothing to them. Aaron groaned. What should he do? Why did he have this memory of his mother just now? Why did his conscience have to revive itself from the dead at the moment he had wings? He nodded, understanding Armin's words. Maybe he could take them outside the walls, then come back for the boulder. Decided, Aaron rose to his feet and fixed his gaze forward. He'd make sure they got out, then have them wait for him. Armin jogged his horse and rejoined Mikasa on horseback. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, well, you're welcome, Armin. The hole in the wall had a ramp of rubble leading up to it, the ground uneven enough that both Mikasa and Armin had to dismount and lead their group of horses out. Aaron went ahead, only to discover nothing outside. Outside. He stared at the overgrown grass. These fields once belonged to the people of Maria. These were his lands. If they followed the river, they would meet Shiganshina again, and within it, a house under a boulder, a basement with no key. Memories. Armin and Mikasa made it outside. Though he couldn't see them, he knew their eyes were wide. But a house below a boulder, a city block crushed by a boulder, and a hole, the perfect home for a boulder. Fuck it. I hope Mama will be proud. Eren breathed heavily and turned back toward the gate. Eren, Armin shouted, where are you going? Eren! He carefully avoided his friends and crawled back through the hole, back to the inside. An inside filled with evil, angry people. If he doesn't block this hole, then those same people will move ever inward, and thousands more will be thrown from the walls. The beggars he could hide among, now those without papers. The scouts would return to destruction. The scouts. Eren groaned, even though they were among the corrupted, killing people and using their deaths as distractions. He respected them once. Approaching the boulder, Eren sized it up. The slab stood upright, erect, like a reminder of what happened this day. Titanic, it towered over the destruction. Eren crouched and leaned forward, inching his fingers below the base. How could he possibly lift this? He dropped to his knees and examined the angle he sat at. The monolith certainly appeared well planted. Coming from the city, it appeared to lean towards the wall, and, he thought perhaps, coming from his side, he could get below it somehow. Yet, from this side, it appeared to lean toward the city. During training, they were taught how to carry fallen comrades by placing the weight over their centers of gravity. Legs were meant to hold weight. When they were made to load up horses and wagons, they would use team lifts to move larger items. Somehow, Eren doubted another Titan would help him lift the rock up. He rose to his feet once more and circled. Though the sides were rugged, he couldn't imagine them good handholds. Maybe he could push it over to lean against a building. One house still stood, mostly upright. He placed both hands on the opposite side and shoved with all his might. His feet slipped from under him, and Eren barely stopped from smashing his face into the rock. He turned away in annoyance. Maybe if he climbed a nearby building and jumped onto it? At a loss for a better idea, Eren did as he planned. Briefly, he wondered if there were any other people on the walls watching his behavior. Certainly, if there were, he'd be tagged an abnormal. Eren jumped and placed his feet forward, hoping to kick the boulder over. His feet connected, and a shock of pain exploded in his legs. Pained, he was unable to stop the rest of himself from crashing into the thing. His hands scrabbled and dug into its surface, and his momentum forced it to begin to topple. Wait, he needed to be under it. Eren released his grip, forgetting his broken legs, and fell to the ground. Fuck. How could Titans keep running around, dumb smiles in place, when everything hurt? The gigantic slab groaned and settled in place. Eren rolled to his side and looked over. Had events taken place as he wanted them to, for once? His goal was in sight, the rock at an angle he could use. His legs stopped steaming, fixed anew. Feeling victorious, Eren rose to his feet and completed one last circuit of the monolith. He looked ahead toward the hole. Then he dropped to a crouch, backed the boulder, wrapped his arms low, dug his claws into the rock, and heaved. His muscles screamed. Sharp, stabbing, angry, his back popped, and with a mighty hoist, the boulder's weight settled between his shoulder blades and back. Crouched at a hard angle, Eren pushed until his legs were straight. He could barely see forward, his head forced down toward the road with the mass he supported. Fuck, this was heavy. Just one step. His mama crushed beneath a boulder, begging him to leave, begging him to stay. Just one step. Armin, crying into a torn straw hat, crying for the only man he ever loved. Just one step. Mikasa, tired of seeing death, tired of surviving, tired of living. Just one step. The scouts, symbols of hope and freedom, only to be lies like everyone. One more step. Jean, just a boy who couldn't possibly know what was done, that he might live. Eren saw Mikasa and Armin outside, back against a wall with their horses, a Titan standing over them. Eren saw the fields beyond, waving grass and gentle clouds. One last step. Eren roared, challenged the Titan to a fight, even as he released his burden behind him. Face forward, Eren. I need you to be safe, my boy. Forward, Eren charged, blood in his eyes. Forward and onward and outward, away.